Welcome to the Grand Island Independence Podcast, The Real Night of the Twisters. Sponsored by Teohaus Tire. Teohaus Tire is the home of the courtesy inspection where they check your brakes, belts, hoses, fluids, tires, and more absolutely free. Teohaus Tire, a tradition of trust since 1947. Today we'll talk to three different survivors about what they remember from that fateful night almost 41 years ago, June 3rd, 1980. We'll kick things off with Grand Island Independent reporter Robert Poor talks to Brent Lindner, a resident of Grand Island, was 13 years old and remembers pretty vividly the day of and the day after the real night of the Twisters.
My name is Brent C. Lindner. I've been living on and off in Grand Island now since 1972.
Where were you at the time of June 3rd, 1980, and what were you doing, and what's your biggest memory of that day?
Boy, that was it was a crazy day, and the night of the tornadoes, you know, I don't recall being, you know, that there was fear in the air or kind of what was going on. We knew there were tornadoes in the area, and we actually lived on Stewart Road, so we were right by Mavis Bowl, where that was an area that got decimated, and we were just on the east side of Stewart Road.
Were you living with your parents?
Yep.
Okay. How old were you at that time?
I would have been, 1980, 13, 14.
13 or 14.
So, yeah, we had just moved there. We lived outside of town a little bit and moved in. And that night, I remember, because it rained so hard also, so we had a back patio with stairs going down to the basement, so we were getting flooded out. There was water coming down so fast. So we were dealing with that. There were high winds. We knew there were tornado warnings. And my dad was actually up on the roof tacking down shingles all during this. And that's all I remember from that night, because I think we slept in the basement. And then I remember, the most of the story comes from then the day after, because there's I knew there were storms, and that was it. Then I went to bed, and I remember waking up, and I could smell like bacon and eggs. My dad would get up and cook breakfast for us.
So utilities were still going and everything?
I thought they were.
Uh-huh.
So, but I smelled the bacon and eggs. So when I went upstairs, there were no utilities. He was cooking out in the garage on a little Coleman stove.
Uh-huh.
So I'm like, and my dad goes, "Hey, it's pretty bad out there." So I actually got on my bike, and my good friend Brian Posham lived right across from Mavis Bowl, and I rode my bike up there, and their house was flattened. And I approached the house, and I saw blood everywhere.
Ooh.
And I just freaked out. I got on my bike. I get emotional about this. I pedaled back, and I was crying, and to my mom and dad, I'm like, oh my God, the Poshans are whatever.
Right.
In this. So for about an hour and a half maybe, I didn't know their whereabouts or what happened. Well, and it turns out they were all okay. They were in the basement, but their house got destroyed.
Right.
And they were right there.
Was there any damage to your home?
No, we lost some trees and some shingles.
Uh-huh.
We were just right on the edge of all that got flattened.
Yeah, that was amazing to see how selective a storm can be. Some houses didn't seem like they got damaged at all, and then you see a house that's totally leveled and stuff like that. That must have been a traumatic event, because this is your best friend, and you know this family, and you see blood, and your mind jumps to the worst possible consequence.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
So
and you were 13 years old at the time too.
Oh yeah. And it turns out now, behind Mavis Bowl to the north, there were actually horses, several horses. The gentleman, whoever owned that, had horses there. So the blood was actually, it blew a horse over to their house, and it landed there, and it had already been hauled away, but it had bled out. So it was messy. So and it freaked me out. But
that was the reason for the blood.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So,
yeah.
But so, I mean, a relief, of course, that and the phone lines worked. So in general, after that, well, Brian came down. They were at some friend's house, and we were just riding our bikes around. So, and I remember Jimmy Carter, the man from Georgia,
Right.
came and surveyed, and he drove right by Brian's house in Mavis Bowl. So we're out there, the fanfare.
I mean,
things like that.
this had to be a shock for a 13-year-old boy to see your world just kind of disrupted. But at the same time, there was sort of an instinct to go out there and help people. I mean, you see that I read stories about World War II, where right after a city got bombed, like London or Hamburg or something like that, instead of just going in shock, people were out helping people all the time, and that's the kind of what you saw here too. Even as a young boy, you were out there helping people.
It was.
With no question about it.
Yeah, and you saw a lot of other people doing it. And I think the interesting thing was that, and I'm just a young kid, not realizing that I had no clue. I mean, that was my just little corner of the world. I wasn't aware of South Locust and that there had been deaths and that there were other areas that just got decimated. It was kind of localized just around our little neighborhood, our friends and neighbors, and not, until maybe months later or years later where you fully grasp how big this
Yeah,
this
the totality
was,
of it,
and
right?
how dangerous it was.
Yeah.
'Cause, my dad's up there tacking on roofs. We're watching the flood come in, trying to put stuff up in the
Sure.
basement, and all the while this is going on. Buildings are getting ripped apart, and with no clue what's going on.
Coming back, we'll talk to a lady who was home with 2 toddlers by herself during the storm. A man who was truck driving on the road and had no idea the storms even happened until they were over, and how frantically he tried to check on his family who was okay. Yes, I'm talking about my parents, as we were survivors of the real night of the Twisters. I'll interview my folks coming up.
When it's time to hit the road, the last thing you need to worry about is your vehicle. At T.O. Haas Tire, we'll inspect your brakes, belts, hoses, fluid, suspension, tires, and more. All done by a certified technician, and all done absolutely free. And don't forget, we have a tire for every vehicle and every budget with optimum tire wear, fuel economy, and most importantly, driver safety.
T.O. Haas Tire and Auto, a tradition of trust.
Welcome back to the Grand Island Independent Podcast, Real Night of the Twisters. I am Josh Salmon. It's very rare that a guy like myself gets to interview his own parents, but we were survivors of the Real Night of the Twisters. In 1980, we lived on 8th Street and Jefferson, right by Jefferson Elementary School. I was 2 years old, almost 3. I had an older brother who was 4, almost 5. Neither of us remember that night at all. My mom was home alone with us. But my mom talked about how she stayed calm during the storm. After Mom will talk about Dad, who was on the road truck driving and had no idea the tornadoes even hit until the next day. It's the Real Night of the Twisters with my parents. Go ahead, Mom. What do you remember?
I remember watching the news, and it seemed like the sirens were going off west of town. So I knew I had to get you boys safe. I'm not the type of person that panics, but I knew it was dangerous. So I took you boys down the basement, and during the night I would go upstairs and get whatever we needed, some food, some toys, because you guys were just toddlers. And I took the beanbag down there so that you had something soft and comfortable to sit in. And we just stayed down the basement, and the sirens kept going off, and the electricity was gone, and I couldn't call anybody. Phone lines were down.
Mattresses over
Yeah, I put a mattress up over the top of us, and we just kind of hid underneath there with the... you guys thought it was okay. You were having fun. You thought it was something different, but it was a little scary to me, and they didn't sound the all clear until like 4 o'clock in the morning. So then I finally took you boys upstairs and let you finish sleeping.
Did
and
you
the
hear
next
any winds or anything outside?
horrendous wind. We had no idea how much damage was done till the next day when your dad came home, but it was pretty loud. and the National Guard, I think, was out too.
Oh, yeah.
And then nobody could have water because they were worried about contamination of the wells. And we were the only ones that had a yard well, so we let all the neighbors come to our house for water because nobody had any water. And when Dad called me that morning, he got through, and then after that, nobody could call anybody. I don't know how he got through that particular time. I think the Lord was helping us out there, but so he knew that we were safe at least. Then we couldn't communicate after that at all. It was pretty scary. Even my mom went to the basement in her house, and she never goes.
Yeah, Grandma, it takes a lot to get Grandma in the basement.
Yes. She'd sit at the table and say, well, if God wants me, he knows where I'm at.
So, probably hail and rain, and did you look out a window or anything? Did you see
Oh,
anything?
yes. I was constantly peeking out the windows, and it was just lightning and thunder, and it was pretty scary. It wasn't as loud in the basement as it would have been upstairs, but I just pretended like, we were just having kind of a camp out in the basement. And
Did we get scared at all as the kids?
not really. Not really. I made sure that you had plenty to eat and you had your toys and we played, and I don't think you were afraid. You just thought it was, this is something fun and different.
Had to stay up all night.
They went to sleep, kind of at normal time. I kept sneaking upstairs and peeking out the windows, and we had a little portable radio, so I was listening to whatever came through on the radio. But a lot of times you couldn't get anything.
Sure.
I don't really know for sure. I think they had sirens that sounded the all clear when it was done.
They said the sirens are going off and on all night long.
Yeah.
So, when next morning you went outside and looked, was the garage little
She never.
filtered?
I really didn't even go, to be honest, I didn't even go outside. I didn't know it until Dad got home later. I think it was later the same day.
Yeah.
And he was, looking at the outside. I was just kind of busy taking care of your kids and making sure the neighbors got some water, and, so I didn't really know exactly what happened outside.
Let's take it back June 3rd, 1980. The real night of the Twisters. I'm here with my parents, who we lived through that night. Dad, what do you remember that night? You were on the road truck driving.
I knew there was a storm coming in, and I was on my way to Chicago, so I thought, well, I'm going to leave early and get out of here so I can stay ahead of the storm and not have to drive in rain all night long getting there. It takes about 7.5 hours to get to Chicago. Well, anyway, I took off and headed out of town, and I knew there was a storm behind me, but didn't think too much about it. And I got into Walcott, Iowa, and it was earlier in the morning, pretty early in the morning. Must have been about 6 o'clock. And I was in the shower, and I wanted to wake up a little bit, so I took a nice shower. And anyway, I heard these two old farmers talking in there, and one says, "Boy, wasn't that a storm last night and out west there?" And I kept listening to it, and pretty soon I said, what were you talking about out west? And he said, "Well, in Nebraska." I said, "Nebraska, what part?" And he said, "Grand Island." And I said, "Well, that's where I'm from. What happened?" And they said they had quite a few tornadoes just hovering the town for over 6 hours last night, and it kept coming down, and it destroyed a good portion of South Locust, or on the main street going south of town. So immediately I get out of the shower and I call, and I got a hold of your mom, and that was the only time I was able to get a hold of her. She told me that you guys had spent the night in the basement, and then I talked to her, and she said you were all right, so I finished my load in Chicago and headed home right away, and I'll let her take over. Oh, when I got back to town, they wouldn't let me into town because it was all blocked off. So I had to reroute and go out in the country and come back around and get the trailer parked out at Chief Industries. And I managed to get in my car, and I got home, and it kind of made our garage kind of picked it up, kind of turned it cockeyed on 8th Street there on Jefferson and 8th. I guess it was, wasn't it? And then it peeled a lot of the paint off, so we had to have the house repainted and straighten out the garage the best we could by hand. And let's see what else. Oh, and then I decided, well, I have movie cameras, so I talked to my friend, and I don't remember which one it was, and I jumped in the back of his pickup, and we drove down through South Locust there, and I took movies of all this. That was kind of my experience and remembering what it was all about. Other than the cleanup was just a mess, and building Tornado Hill out there by the National Guard building.
So was most of South Locust then wiped out?
Oh
Yes,
yeah, South
yes.
Locust got it really, really
And
bad.
Bismarck out there
Yes.
by the bowling alley south of there, they
Going
got hit
east.
bad. Picked one house up and flipped it around, set it back on the foundation. But it picked that house up and turned it around, set it on the foundation, and they just left it there and changed the walls in the basement. And decided to change the walls. It was cheaper than turning the house around again.
Interesting. So, Ed, when you were driving in the car the next day with your friend or whatever, and you saw,
I was in the back of the pickup.
Okay. What was your first thoughts of the destruction? I mean, did you realize the caliber until you saw all the?
You don't really think about it. I'll tell you, it actually looked like a bomb went off. I've seen a lot of sites like that, and it looked like one whale of a bomb went off because everything, it was just nothing but shattered. This debris scattered everywhere. Not just wood, bricks, tar paper, garbage. I couldn't believe it.
Cars.
Cars scattered all over.
I remember there was one motorhome that had a 2x4 driven through the tire, and it went in so fast
Yeah.
that the air never even came out of the tire. The air was still in the tire with
that's
that
right.
2x4 sticking out
There was
of
a
it.
picture of that in the paper.
Was there? Well, that was,
I remember that. I'd
that was
forgotten
pretty.
about it.
But it was just like everything was kind of flattened and jumbled up, and you couldn't even picture what it looked like before.
No.
Well, my parents and I and my brother are very thankful that we got to be survivors of the Real Night of the Twisters. We appreciate you tuning in here to this edition of the Real Night of the Twisters from Grand Island Independent Podcast, sponsored by Tio Haas Tire. Tio Haas Tire is the home of the courtesy inspection, where they check your brakes, belts, hoses, fluids, tires, and more absolutely free. Tio Haas Tire, a tradition of trust since 1947. Come back next time for episode 4 of the Real Night of the Twisters, presented by the Grand Island Independent. This podcast, copyright Grand Island Independent and Lee Enterprises, 2021. Written, produced, and voiced by Josh Salmon. I want to thank you, Robert Poor, for coming on, Brent Lindner for telling your story as well. And until next time, everybody, so long.